we'll directly move to the e-invoicing framework. The FTA has come up with a framework which defines how e-invoicing would take place. They have defined a model, they have agreed upon the network, they have come up with the data dictionary very recently. They have told us on which people or which kind of category of business it will be applicable, and they have defined the authorized committee as well. So let's discuss about the model. The model is a 5-corner model wherein there would be 2 corners. One is the buyer as well as the seller. The 2 other corners would be the ASP or the authorized service provider of the buyer and seller, and then there will be the FTA. So there are 5 corners. We'll discuss about the 5 corners in detail. So there will be a transaction which has to go through 5 legs and it will be concluded after that. Then the network is considered, like now most of the countries have different network for e-invoicing. In UAE, the people network has been considered, which is a EU based network which will integrate and which will exchange invoices and details from one company to another. Recently, the FTA has come up with the data dictionary. The data dictionary has defined fields which are required for integration. They have defined steps which are required for one enterprise to interact with the other enterprise. So the e-invoicing solution will depend upon the data dictionary and the language which is prescribed. Then we also know on which entities or which type of transactions it will be applicable. Initially, it will be applicable on B2B businesses and B2G businesses, followed by B2C in subsequent phases. And what we are given to understand is that the FTA will become a part of the People Authority. People Authority is a community which is there in the EU, and FTA will become a part of the People Authority to integrate and become a part. Like now, if we are going to be exporting something from UAE to say a country in EU, we'll have to ensure that the people number of the buyer is also put in our invoice, such that there's a proper integration and there's a proper export from us to the EU customer. So it's not only UAE based e-invoicing, it is an international global e-invoicing platform which is going to be used. Like I was telling you about the 5-corner. The 5-corner is a very simple model wherein 2 corners are the buyer and the seller. Then the ASP or the accredited service provider, like TaxLab is our service provider who is going to be facilitating or giving you a solution for e-invoicing. There will be 2 ASPs for buyer and seller. And the 5th corner would be the FTA. Now, what will happen is the invoice will be issued by the supplier and it will go through the ASP or the service provider of the supplier to the ASP of the buyer and to the FTA. Now the ASP of the buyer will validate and issue the invoice to the buyer. So that's the entire chain, and that's how the entire communication is going to happen. That's the reason why data dictionary is defined such that the communication becomes easy from one ASP to another and the validated invoice is issued to the buyer. Now what we envisage is the invoice would have a QR code. What do you say, sir?
Yeah, I think important aspect when you talk about the data dictionary is very important, that you will hear about that 50 fields. When we say where 50 fields are there, why these 50 fields? Because every industry may have some or other requirements. I mean, some are importing, some are exporting, many are selling locally. There is a free zone, there's a designated zone, and so on and so forth. There's a critical rule around every industry, and then jurisdiction also played a significant role. Hence, these data, the consistency of data across the platform is very critical, and that's why probably the number of 50 that came out there. Yeah.
So moving ahead, after this model, we'll give you a brief about what are the key benefits and what are the drivers for getting this e-invoicing. Now, it is said that there will be a lot of speed, there will be a lot of accuracy because everything will be automated, the returns would populate automatically, the compliance will become automated, the audit will become automated because everything will be driven through a XML format and the entire returns and everything would be generated. That's good. There will be a digital transformation and this is in line with the sustainability aim of government, which they don't want to use paper, they want to go paper free, and this is the key example wherein they will achieve this. There's a real-time tracking of all the invoices. Now in the FAQs, the FTA has said that there will be a real-time or a near real-time tracking. So as you issue an invoice, it has to be validated and given it to the customer. So you can't issue the invoice and get it validated later. So you have to have a real-time basis of validation, and this will increase efficiency in the entire supply chain. There will be no legs wherein the buyer is issuing, the supplier is issuing an invoice, and there is the creditor is also directly going to the buyer. So there will be no lag, and there will be, so the main reason why people implement e-invoicing is just to ensure that there's no breakage in the entire supply chain and there's no fraudulent activities happening.
And it is critical. You see in essentially a different part of the world when invoicing brings in picture. It means you are connected instantly on real time basis with federal authority. It means today when you issue an invoice, the supplier can come and say that, look, why you applied 5% instead of 0%, or you applied 0% instead of 5%. So there is an opportunity and there's a window that somebody can go and change it. But technically, when the e-invoicing comes into picture, it means that your transaction, as soon as it's get remitted or digitally remitted, that point in time you need to have right validation in place to correct and apply the right tax at right percentage within your invoice. The treatment has to be right.
We'll quickly tell you about the timelines. Now, the FTA had, or the Ministry of Finance had told in Q4 of 2024 that there will be a sort of a accredited service provider details and how they have to register will come out. But they have still not given a heads up. But there are some indications and some guidance which are provided, wherein our tax labs is also aligned to that. They are also meeting the conditions and they are also trying to get themselves registered. We are going to be one of the first persons to get registered with the FTA and the Ministry of Finance for e-invoicing. Recently, like 2-3 weeks back, the data dictionary came in and they defined a lot of fields and more clarity was provided. The legislation is expected to come out in the second quarter of 2025, which will give us more guidance, and the definition of e-invoicing, credit note, and all those other documents will be coming in picture, which will make it very clear how the entire process would flow. The case scenarios will also be defined. Currently, there are 16 case scenarios defined in the data dictionary, which will become a part of the law. Now, public consultation has also been given by us. We have applied about 10 to 12 consultation documents to the FTA saying that these are the changes or these are the points to be catered and considered while you are making the legislation. Ultimately, maybe by 2026 July, we will be alive and the implementation would happen. There are a few important aspects which we have learned from the data dictionary, that all the various types of transactions are considered separate, the scenarios are considered separate. Most importantly, the tax invoice would have at least 50 fields, including the details of the buyer, details of the seller, as well as the company details and the transaction details. What we envisage is that there will be a substantial change required in the company master, the supplier master, as well as the buyer master to cater to all this. There'll be a lot of fields which will be required in the invoice, which has to be catered to. Currently, about 15 to 16 fields are there in the invoice, but there has to be a change. We are working along with industries to understand if this change is possible. If this is not possible, we are filing a consultation. Tomorrow is the last day for filing. We have already filed a lot of consultations. We are waiting for a few other industries to respond back. One of the most important thing which we realized like in a couple of days, that free zones and free trade zones will also be a part of the e-invoicing. Why? Because there are a lot of transactions happening with EU. All the transactions which are happening with EU and all the transactions happening globally will also be recorded and kept in the entire POPOL system to cater, and this will also be reported as a purchase for them who are sitting outside, and whenever they are selling, it will be recorded as a purchase to us.
So this, what does it mean actually? Because why people use adopt PayPal? Because ultimately it's a global network. So today and tomorrow, what is going to happen is entire tax is going to be integrated. It means like today, if somebody issues a particular invoice, people can validate whether this invoice is real or it's fake. So going forward in time to come, the entire globe where the PayPal is in use, you'll be able to validate, and tax authority around the world will be able to validate and ensure that the consistency is being maintained. A document which is issued in the UAE is the same document received in part of Europe or in Latin America or in India itself. So there'll not be kind of two different sort of document, like which today might be in practice. At some point in time, there's a commercial invoice and there's a tax invoice, could have slight difference out there, but then this difference will go away slightly.
More important thing is that this is in alignment with customs. Now there was a requirement from customs saying that okay, fine, you have to consider HS code also.
Yeah.
Now there's an optional, like currently it is optional, but later on there will be a requirement to include the HS code of all the transactions. Not because the valuation. Now, if you see valuation from custom perspective and VAT perspective is 5%, that's okay. But what is the actual transaction value, that also has to be taken into account. So for those reasons, HS code will also become a part of the e-invoicing, and that will also be displayed on the face of the invoice in a later date. That date has to be decided by the FTA, but they have defined it currently.